apparent that he does have psychopathic tendencies, and he's somebody who's got to be taken out of society and parked somewhere so he no longer harms anybody else.
A quadruple murder rocks a small city in Northern California when the victim's next-door neighbor commits the gruesome crimes that so far don't have a motive. What's more, the suspect is only 17 years old, and police say his mother and her boyfriend helped out.
There's quite a bit of emotional energy that goes into actually having to do something like this.
It happened in Reedley, California, just 30 minutes southeast of Fresno. On January 6th, investigators were dispatched to a home for reports of a burglary. Inside, they found an empty gun safe that they believe pistols and rifles had been taken from. They also found 3 bodies. 81-year-old Billy Bonds and his granddaughter-in-law, 44-year-old Guadalupe Kiki Bonds, were found inside. The body of Billy's son, 61-year-old Daryl Bonds, was found in a shallow grave out back. At the time, investigators said 43-year-old Matthew Bonds was missing and at risk. Matthew was the husband of Guadalupe, son of Daryl, and grandson of Billy. Matthew's body was recovered days later on January 9th. He was found in a detached garage at the suspect's home, just next door to his. That suspect is a 17-year-old boy whose name is not being publicly released. Investigators only say he had a prior relationship with Matthew Bonds, but we're still unclear what that relationship may have been. The 17-year-old was charged with their murders, but police say he didn't act alone. His mother, 34-year-old Brynn Curtis, and her boyfriend, 21-year-old Rafael Gonzalez, were both charged as accessories after the fact. According to retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt, it would be unlikely the 17-year-old acted alone.
Basically, this crime scene is 4 different places, 4 different victims. It'd be very hard for one person to go from place to place to place to kill all these people. And it appears that it's likely not only he might have had some assistance actually killing the people, but also in planning the deaths of all these people, because there's quite a bit of logistics, so to speak, to go into having to go from 3 different crime scenes and it's not as easy as people think to kill somebody. There's quite a bit of emotional energy that goes into actually having to do something like this.
He's the only person right now charged with murder, the murder of 4 people. So how did this one 17-year-old go up against 4 grown adults?
Well, and we can speculate, as far as his objection or his motive as well as his ability. Not knowing exactly who the 17-year-old is, it comes down to basically, okay, how big is he? How strong is he? How motivated he was? Was he on a methamphetamine or cocaine or some drug that would make him even more, have more adrenaline to kind of get through each killing? As well as the fact were the victims, were they in a state where they were kind of impaired, so to speak? Were they intoxicated? Were they sleeping? Were they on some sort of drugs themselves, which limited their ability to defend themselves?
As of now, investigators have released few details about what led up to the murders or the crimes in general. Right now, we don't even know the manners of death, at least according to investigators. They're not releasing it, just saying the crime scene was very heinous. When it comes to something like this, how important is a motive?
Well, I think that the situation is completely out of control, so to speak, and obviously the state of the crime scene is going to be indicative of the motive. Basically, if it's going to demonstrate how much emotion this person had when he was in there. And if they're saying that the crime scene is extremely grisly, it sounded like this guy or whoever did this went in there with a purpose, was very angry or very intoxicated, so to speak, and went in there with a purpose of, frankly, killing everybody.
For the 2 adults charged as accessories, Schmidt hypothesizes they weren't originally part of the plan, but pitched in after the victims had already been killed.
Likely he came home and he was probably just full of blood. He was covered with blood because of the grisly nature of these murders, and they have a duty to actually notify the authorities, and versus what they probably did, which was helped him clean up and helped him hide the fact that he did this. So that would be the first step of this. And the second step would be they actually assisted him in some way of burying one of the victims, or actually the planning of actually going out and killing all these people.
As for the crime scene, investigators are keeping details close to the vest. If we're taking a closer look at the crime scenes, there were two people who were found in the home, and then out back, there was another victim who was found in a shallow grave. I kind of wanted to focus on that part. Why may the 17-year-old and potentially the other people have decided to partially bury this person and leave the other two out in the open in the home?
Well, I think it comes down to the timeline. It might have been, it depends on who was killed first and who was killed second, third, and fourth. So the person that was the shallow grave, that might have been the first victim. And he decided he wanted to hide that victim. And then as he moved on to the next victims, he figured out that it wasn't even worth his time to go ahead and try to create a shallow grave. The second point is, did the mother and the boyfriend come in after the fact and try to cover up the crime scene by covering up that victim with dirt?
How important is the order of the murders? You mentioned who was killed first, second, third, fourth. Is that something that investigators will be working to determine?
Absolutely. The timeline in a violent crime is everything. And we've talked about this before. They're going to look at the phones. They're going to look at his behavior. They're going to look at all the people around him. They're going to look at his Facebook postings. They're going to look at his computer. They're going to do all of this. But the timeline is everything, because that demonstrates not only motive, but also the probably the target of his anger would be indicative of that timeline. He's most likely going to go after the person he wanted to kill, that he's the most angry at first, and then kill all the witnesses, so to speak, after that.
Prosecutors have noted they hope to charge the 17-year-old as an adult and have reportedly even filed paperwork to move that process forward.
When you have this level of violence and callous nature and frankly psychopathic behavior, he absolutely needs to be charged as an adult. In California, I mean, they have the death penalty. It hasn't been enforced in many, many years. I'm sure that would be part of the plea negotiations to pull that off the table, so he ends up taking a plea to all of this this violence and carnage. But definitely, he needs to be charged as an adult. He needs to be carved out of society so he never harms another person.
You mentioned psychopathic behavior. And I mean, when I'm thinking of any murder, you have to be somewhat out of your mind to commit it. But to commit back to back to back murders, 4 in total, is it possible that he suffered a mental break?
Well, I mean, just by definition of murder, you are suffering a mental break, because you have to. People aren't wired to kill. There's many studies of soldiers that come back with PTSD and all these other issues because they've had to do what they've done because they weren't, wired mentally to be killing machines. And the ones that don't come back, there's always a question on whether, okay, do they have a psychopathic tendency? So this kid was this callous and this without any empathy at all for his victims. It's apparent that he does have psychopathic tendencies, and he's somebody who's got to be taken out of society and parked somewhere so he no longer harms anybody else.
It's still possible more charges could be filed in the case. And if we're looking at charges, the mother and her boyfriend right now are just charged as accessories. Is it possible that those charges could be bumped up as the investigation moves forward?
Absolutely. That if they're shown they had any knowledge of his intent to do this beforehand, they would charge them with conspiracy or accessory to a murder, where they end up going to look at a life in prison as well as he is.
But according to Schmidt, the investigation is far from over.
Well, I think the fact that they found 4 victims, there's the kind of the rule of thumb in law enforcement: if there's 3, there's 4, there's more. So I'm sure they're still out there looking to make sure there is no other victims, and now they're in the process of finding witnesses, whether it be human witnesses or witnesses as in the bodies are witnesses, or witnesses in terms of the digital evidence from his phone, from his computer, and from their phone and computer, the mother and the boyfriend.
Investigators have also impounded multiple vehicles connected to the case and ask anyone with more information to come forward. Right now, both Gonzalez and Curtis are out on bond but are due back in court next month. The 17-year-old boy is being held in a juvenile facility. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.